3 years after their daughter Emma vanished into the forest, Lucia had become a ghost in her own home. Every night, she sat in Emma's untouched bedroom, staring at the tree line where her daughter had disappeared. Then, on the 3rd anniversary of that terrible day, something impossible happened. A wild bobcat appeared at the window, tapping deliberately on the glass with its paw, as if trying to deliver a message. It wasn't hunting. It wasn't threatening. It was waiting. The bobcat locked eyes with Lucia, then turned toward the forest, pausing to look back as if expecting her to follow. Against every rational instinct, against her husband's desperate protests, Lucia decided to trust this wild messenger. The bobcat led her on a grueling trek deep into uncharted wilderness, through terrain search parties had never explored. Lucia thought she was following her last thread of hope. But what she was about to discover wasn't just about survival. She was about to uncover the truth behind one of nature's most impossible bonds. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't. And hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days, but Lucia Mitchell barely noticed anymore. At 2 a.m., she sat curled in Emma's window seat, wrapped in her daughter's favorite blanket that still held the faintest scent of strawberry shampoo. The room looked exactly as it had 3 years ago. The stuffed animals arranged on the bed, the half-finished puzzle on the floor, the fairy lights strung across the ceiling that Lucia couldn't bring herself to turn off. Across the hall, she could hear Charles's fitful breathing. Her husband had stopped trying to coax her back to their bedroom months ago. He'd stopped saying, "She's gone," even longer ago, after the screaming match that had left them both broken on the kitchen floor. At 35, Lucia had once been vibrant, with quick laughter and paint perpetually under her fingernails from her art studio downtown. Now her hair hung limp and unwashed, her face was pale and gaunt, and her hands never stopped trembling. The search parties had given up after 6 months. The counselor had used words like closure and moving forward. The neighbors had stopped bringing casseroles and started crossing the street to avoid eye contact. But Lucia kept watch. Every night, every single night for 3 years, she sat at this window and stared at the dark tree line of the Cascade Range where Emma had been playing when Lucia had gone inside for just 10 minutes to answer a work call. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was so deliberate, so rhythmic, that at first Lucia thought she'd imagined it. Then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. She lifted her head, her heart lurching. Pressed against the rain-streaked glass was a bobcat, a massive wild cat with spotted fur and tufted ears, its amber eyes glowing in the lamplight. But it wasn't snarling. It wasn't trying to break in. Its paw was raised, tapping the window with almost human precision. Lucia's breath caught. Wild animals didn't do this. They didn't approach homes. They didn't make eye contact like this. They certainly didn't tap on windows as if they were knocking to come inside. The bobcat held her gaze for a long moment, unblinking and intense. Then it dropped from the windowsill and walked slowly toward the tree line, its movements purposeful and controlled. After 10 feet, it stopped, turned back, and waited. Lucia's hands gripped the blanket. Her rational mind screamed that this was grief-induced madness, that she was finally having the breakdown everyone had been waiting for. But something deeper, something primal and maternal, recognized the message in those amber eyes. This wasn't a random encounter. This was a summons. Behind her, floorboards creaked. Lucia. Charles's voice was thick with sleep and concern. "What are you?" But Lucia was already moving toward the door. The sound came at 2:17 a.m., deliberate, insistent, impossible. Tap, tap, tap. Lucia's eyes opened in Emma's bedroom, where she'd spent every night for the past 3 years. The room still smelled of lavender detergent and the ghost of her daughter's strawberry shampoo. She'd stopped changing the sheets 6 months ago. What was the point? Emma wasn't coming home. Emma was gone, swallowed by the forest during a camping trip that had started with laughter and ended with search helicopters and cadaver dogs finding nothing but silence. Tap, tap, tap. She turned her head toward the window, expecting a branch. The oak tree sometimes scraped against the glass when the wind picked up. But there was no wind tonight. The air hung still and heavy, pressing against the house like a held breath. That's when she saw it. Golden eyes, luminous in the darkness. A broad face marked with distinctive black lines. Tufted ears pricked forward with laser focus. The bobcat sat on the narrow ledge outside the second-story window, one paw raised and pressed against the glass. Not scratching, tapping. Its gaze locked onto hers with an intensity that sent electricity down her spine. Wild animals don't approach houses. They don't climb to second-story windows. They certainly don't sit calmly and tap on glass like they're trying to get someone's attention. Lucia knew this. She'd grown up in these woods, had seen bobcats from a distance. Shadows that melted into underbrush the moment they sensed human presence. They were ghosts, phantoms, creatures that wanted nothing to do with people. But this one stared at her like it had been looking for her specifically. Like it had a message to deliver. Lucia's hand moved to the window latch before her mind could interfere with logic or self-preservation. The click sounded unnaturally loud in the silent room. The bobcat's ears twitched, but it didn't flee. Instead, it backed up slightly, waiting. She pushed the window open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The bobcat made a sound, not a growl or a hiss, but something softer, more urgent. Then it leaped from the ledge to the oak branch, landing with impossible grace, and looked back at her. The message was clear. Follow me. Every rational cell in Lucia's body screamed that this was insane. You don't follow wild predators into the forest at night. You don't climb out second-story windows in your nightgown because an animal that shouldn't even be there seems to be asking you to. You don't abandon reason for the first spark of feeling you've had in 3 years. But Lucia was already swinging her legs over the sill. She'd given up on miracles the day Emma disappeared. She'd watched hope die slowly over weeks of searches, months of tips that led nowhere, years of living in a house that had become a mausoleum. Charles slept alone in their bedroom now. She couldn't remember the last time she'd really looked at him, really seen him, instead of just existing in the same space like furniture. The bobcat moved down the tree with fluid certainty, then stopped at the edge of the lawn, waiting. Its eyes caught the porch light. Twin flames in the darkness. Lucia's bare feet hit the dewy grass. The cold shocked through her, made her gasp, made her feel alive in a way she'd forgotten was possible. The bobcat took 3 steps toward the tree line, then stopped and looked back again. Lucia. Charles's voice cracked through the night, thick with sleep and confusion. She turned to see him leaning out the window she'd just climbed through, his face ghostly pale in the darkness. What are you, Jesus Christ, Lucia, what are you doing? I have to go, she heard herself say. The words felt strange in her mouth, too simple for the magnitude of what was happening. Go where? There's nothing out there. His voice pitched higher, edging toward panic. Please come back inside. We can call Dr. Morrison, we can. But Lucia was already moving. The bobcat had started walking toward the forest, glancing back every few steps to make sure she was following. Each time it looked at her, she felt it again, that electric certainty that this wasn't random, wasn't her grief-broken mind manufacturing meaning from chaos. Lucia. Charles's shout split the night. She heard the window slam, heard his footsteps pounding through the house. He'd be coming after her. He'd try to stop her. He'd use words like breakdown and dangerous and 3 years is enough, you need help. He wouldn't understand. How could he? He'd let Emma go. He'd accepted that their daughter was gone, had tried to convince Lucia to do the same, had suggested therapy and grief counseling and maybe, eventually, trying again. As if another child could fill the Emma-shaped hole in the universe. The bobcat reached the tree line and paused, turning to face her fully. In the pre-dawn darkness, it looked mythical, like something from a fairy tale. The kind where animals talk and impossible things happen and mothers get their daughters back. Lucia ran. Behind her, she heard the front door bang open. Heard Charles shouting her name with a desperation that might have broken her heart if her heart wasn't already shattered beyond repair. But she didn't stop. She plunged into the forest, branches catching at her nightgown, roots threatening to trip her, the cold air burning her lungs. The bobcat moved ahead of her like a golden ghost, always visible, always waiting when she fell too far behind. It knew where it was going. And somewhere in the deepest part of herself, the part that had never stopped believing Emma was alive, that had kept vigil every night for 3 years, Lucia knew she had to follow. Even if it killed her. Even if it was madness. Even if Charles was right and there was nothing out there but forest and darkness and the final breaking of her mind. She followed the messenger into the wild dark, leaving everything behind. The forest swallowed her whole. Lucia had been in these woods before, on the search parties, on the anniversary walks where she retraced Emma's last known steps like a ritual of self-flagellation. But never like this. Never at night, never running, never following something that shouldn't exist. The bobcat moved through the darkness like liquid gold, weaving between trees with a certainty that made the forest seem less like wilderness and more like a mapped city, every root and stone a familiar landmark. Her nightgown snagged on a blackberry thicket. She yanked it free, heard fabric tear, felt thorns rake across her shin. Blood, warm and wet, trickled down to her ankle. She didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The bobcat had paused 30 feet ahead, its eyes catching what little moonlight filtered through the canopy. Twin lanterns saying, "Hurry, hurry, we don't have much time." Behind her, Charles's voice ricocheted through the trees. Lucia. For God's sake, Lucia. He was closer than she'd thought. He'd grab shoes, probably a flashlight. He'd be faster than her, more prepared. He'd catch her and drag her back to the house, back to the bedroom where Emma's clothes still hung in the closet, back to the suffocating weight of a grief that had calcified into something permanent. She pushed harder, branches whipping across her face, her bare feet screaming protest with every step. The bobcat moved deeper into terrain she didn't recognize. They'd left the trails behind. This was the part of the forest the search parties had marked as too remote, too unlikely. Emma had been 7. She couldn't have made it this far alone. But what if she hadn't been alone? The thought sparked and died as Lucia's foot caught on an exposed root. She went down hard, palms slamming into damp earth, her knee striking stone. Pain exploded white-hot behind her eyes. She tasted dirt and copper. For a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only lie there in the leaf litter while her body catalogued its damages. The bobcat appeared above her, so close she could smell its wild musk, could see the way its whiskers twitched. It made that sound again, urgent, insistent, then nudged her shoulder with its broad head. Not gently. A push that said, get up now." Lucia dragged herself to her feet. Her knee buckled but held. Blood dripped from her palms, mapped new geography across her torn nightgown. She looked like something from a horror film, she thought distantly. She looked like a woman who'd finally lost her mind. Maybe she had. The memory hit her without warning, triggered by the scent of pine and morning dew. Emma at the campsite 3 years ago, spinning in circles with her arms outstretched, laughing at the way the trees seemed to dance with her. "Mama, look. The forest is alive." Charles had been making breakfast, and Lucia had been checking her phone for work emails, only half watching. Emma had wandered toward the stream to look for smooth stones. "Stay where I can see you," Lucia had called, not looking up. When she'd finally looked up, Emma was gone. They'd searched for 17 days. Helicopters with thermal imaging, bloodhounds, search and rescue teams from 3 counties. The forest had given them nothing. Not a shoe, not a hair ribbon, not a single thread of her purple jacket. It was as if Emma had simply evaporated, transformed into mist and carried away on the morning breeze. Lucia stumbled over another root, caught herself on a tree trunk. Her hands left bloody prints on the bark. The bobcat was moving faster now, urgent, and she realized with creeping horror that she was slowing down. Her body, neglected for 3 years, barely eating, barely sleeping, barely existing, was failing her. Her lungs burned. Her legs trembled. Each breath felt like swallowing glass. Charles's voice again, closer now. "Lucia, please." The desperation in it would have broken her once. Before, when she'd been someone who could still feel things besides the hollow ache of Emma's absence. But that person had died in these woods 3 years ago. What was left was just a shell, animated only by the impossible hope that a wild animal seemed to be offering. The terrain shifted, growing steeper. They were climbing now, ascending a ridge she didn't remember from any map. The bobcat scaled it effortlessly while Lucia clawed her way up, using exposed roots as handholds, her feet slipping on loose stones. Twice she slid backward, losing precious ground. Behind her, she could hear Charles crashing through the underbrush, could hear him calling her name between ragged breaths. At the top of the ridge, the bobcat stopped and looked back. And for the first time since this impossible night began, Lucia saw something in its expression that looked almost like concern. It watched her haul herself over the edge, watched her collapse onto her hands and knees, gasping and shaking. Then it moved closer and touched its nose to her cheek, a gesture so tender, so deliberate that tears finally came. "I can't," Lucia whispered. "I can't keep going." The bobcat held her gaze. In the growing light of pre-dawn, she could see its eyes more clearly. They were ancient and knowing and sad, eyes that had seen loss, that understood what it meant to search for something that might be gone forever. Eyes that said, "Yes, you can. You must." She thought of Emma spinning in a campsite clearing, thought of 3 years of sitting in that bedroom waiting for a miracle she'd stopped believing in. She thought of Charles's face when the police had finally called off the active search, the way something in him had broken and then, horribly, begun to heal. She thought of the woman she'd been before, the one who'd been too busy checking emails to watch her daughter walk into the trees. The bobcat turned and continued down the far side of the ridge. Lucia stood. Her legs shook. Blood dripped from a dozen wounds. Her nightgown hung in tatters. But she followed. Because this wild creature had come to her window, had looked into her eyes and seen something worth saving. Because in 3 years of searching, nothing had felt as true as this impossible journey into the dark heart of the forest. Charles crested the ridge behind her. Lucia, wait. But she was already descending, already following the golden ghost deeper into the wild dark, toward whatever truth or madness or miracle waited at the end of this impossible path. Behind her, Charles's flashlight beam cut through the trees like a searchlight. Ahead, the bobcat moved with purpose. And somewhere in the distance, barely audible over her own ragged breathing, Lucia thought she heard it, the sound of water rushing over stones. The stream where Emma had gone to look for smooth rocks 3 years ago. The stream that flowed deeper into the forest than any search party had followed. The stream sang in the darkness, its voice a murmur of secrets and time. Lucia stood at its edge, swaying, her torn feet bleeding into the moss-covered stones. The bobcat had stopped on the opposite bank, waiting with that infinite patience she was beginning to recognize. Not the patience of a predator stalking prey. The patience of someone who understood that grief moved slowly, that broken things needed time to cross impossible distances. Charles crashed through the undergrowth behind her, his flashlight beam sweeping wildly across the water. Lucia, thank God, he reached for her arm, but she pulled away, her eyes fixed on the bobcat. The animal's gaze shifted to Charles, and something passed through its expression. Not threat, but warning. A mother protecting what was hers. "Don't touch me," Lucia heard herself say. Her voice sounded strange, raw from exertion and something deeper. "I have to follow it. Follow it." Charles's voice cracked. "It's a wild animal. It's leading you in circles, Lucia. We're miles from the house. You're hurt, you're bleeding." He shone the flashlight across her body, and even she could see how bad it looked. Her nightgown hung in bloody ribbons. Cuts and scratches covered her arms and legs. One foot was swollen, possibly broken. But the bobcat wasn't attacking. Wasn't leading her off cliffs or into danger. Every time she'd fallen, it had waited. Every time she'd slowed, it had circled back. And there was something in the way it moved, the way it kept checking to make sure she was following. "It's not trying to hurt me," she whispered. "Lucia, please." Charles stepped closer, his hands raised like he was approaching someone on a ledge. "You're not thinking clearly. You haven't been thinking clearly for 3 years. I know you're in pain, I know you miss her, but this—" He gestured helplessly at the forest, at the bobcat, at her destroyed body. "This isn't the answer. There is no answer. She's gone." The words should have shattered her. Once they would have. But standing here in the pre-dawn darkness, watching this wild creature watch her back with eyes that held something she recognized, Lucia felt a clarity she hadn't experienced in years. "You let her go," she said quietly. "You buried her without a body. You moved on." "I didn't move on, I learned to survive. I never stopped looking." Lucia's eyes remained on the bobcat. "Every night, every single night for 3 years, I sat in her window. And tonight something looked back." The bobcat made a low sound. Not a growl, not a purr, but something in between. A sound of recognition, of shared understanding. Then it did something that stopped Lucia's breath. It walked to a spot on the bank, pawed at the earth, and looked up at her with an expression of unmistakable sorrow. Lucia crossed the stream, the icy water shocking against her wounds. Charles shouted behind her, but his voice felt distant, unimportant. She reached the spot where the bobcat had pawed and saw what it wanted her to see. A small depression in the earth, carefully arranged stones, leaves placed with deliberate care. Not random. Not natural. A grave. The bobcat touched its nose to the stones, then looked at Lucia. And in that moment she understood. This creature knew loss. It had stood vigil over absence. It had marked the place where something precious had disappeared from the world. The arrangement was too intentional, too tender to be anything else. "Oh," Lucia breathed, sinking to her knees. "You lost them too." The bobcat moved closer, pressed its broad head against her shoulder. The same gesture it had used to get her moving when she'd fallen. But this time it wasn't a push. It was something else. Comfort. Communion. The touch of one shattered mother to another. Tears came then, hot and fast. The first real tears she'd cried since the night Emma vanished. Not the dry, gasping sobs of early grief, but deep, soul-emptying tears that came from a place beyond words. She wept for this animal's lost cubs, for her lost daughter, for all the mothers in the world who kept vigil over empty spaces. The bobcat stayed pressed against her, solid and warm and impossibly real. Its heart beat against her cheek, steady, alive, insistent. Charles had crossed the stream now, his flashlight illuminating the scene. His wife on her knees, embracing a wild predator that should have torn her throat out by now. "Lucia," he whispered, and there was something new in his voice. Not disbelief. Fear mixed with wonder. Lucia pulled back and looked into the bobcat's amber eyes. "You're showing me," she said. "You're showing me you understand." The animal held her gaze for a long moment, then turned and continued along the stream bank. But slower now, with more deliberation. It stopped every few feet to look back, and Lucia realized what had changed. This wasn't a chase anymore. It was a pilgrimage. The bobcat wasn't running from them. It was bringing them somewhere. Carefully. The way you'd guide someone through a sacred space. The way you'd lead another mother to the place where lost children go. "I have to follow," Lucia said, standing despite the protest of every muscle, every torn nerve. Charles stared at her, his face a map of exhaustion and terror and something else, a dawning understanding that something impossible was unfolding. "Then I'm coming with you," he said finally. "If you're going to follow this thing into the wilderness, I'm not letting you do it alone." The bobcat waited for them both, patient as stone, patient as grief. When they moved toward it, it turned and continued upstream. The water's voice grew louder, rushing over unseen rocks, moving deeper into the forest's heart where the search parties had never reached, where something had been waiting for 3 years. Lucia no longer felt the pain in her feet, the fire in her lungs, the weight of her wounded body. She felt only the pull, that golden thread connecting her to this creature who spoke the language of loss, who understood that some vigils never end, who knew that mothers don't abandon their posts even when the world tells them to. The bobcat led them forward through the growing dawn. Behind them, the small grave rested beneath its careful stones. Ahead, the forest kept its secrets, but not for much longer. Dawn broke like a wound across the sky, bleeding pink and gold through the canopy. Lucia had lost track of time, lost track of distance, lost track of everything except the bobcat's golden form moving ahead through terrain that grew increasingly hostile. The stream had narrowed to a trickle, then disappeared entirely into a crack in the earth, a fissure so deep and dark that Charles's flashlight beam couldn't find the bottom. The bobcat skirted the edge of this chasm with careful steps, leading them along a ridge that grew narrower with each passing minute. Below, the forest floor had dropped away into shadows and stone. Above, the trees thinned, their roots clinging to rock faces like desperate fingers. "This is impossible," Charles breathed behind her. The search grids covered everything within a 10-mile radius. They had dogs, helicopters, ground-penetrating radar. They would have found this. But even as he said it, Lucia could see why they hadn't. The ravine was hidden beneath a natural canopy of overhanging rock and ancient pines, invisible from above. The ridge they walked was barely wide enough for a child, let alone a search party with equipment. And the way the terrain folded in on itself, creating false walls and dead ends, you could pass within 50 feet and never know this place existed. The bobcat stopped at what looked like a solid rock face. But as Lucia drew closer, she saw the narrow opening, a crack in the stone barely 3 feet wide, leading into darkness. A cave mouth or the entrance to something larger. The kind of place a frightened child might hide. The kind of place where someone small and terrified could disappear. The kind of place that could swallow a 7-year-old girl and keep her hidden for 3 years. Lucia's legs gave out. She collapsed onto the narrow ridge, her back against cold stone, her body finally acknowledging what she'd been refusing to accept. She had nothing left. Her feet were shredded, her hands raw, her nightgown stiff with dried blood. She'd pushed herself beyond endurance, beyond reason, following a wild animal into the deepest part of the forest because she was too broken to know better. And now she was here, staring at a cave that probably held nothing but darkness and disappointment and the final death of a hope that should have died 3 years ago. Lucia. Charles knelt beside her, his face haggard in the growing light. He looked like he'd aged a decade in the past few hours. "We need to get you to a hospital. You're in shock, you've lost blood." "She's in there," Lucia whispered. "There's nothing in there." It's just a cave, just another place the forest swallowed our daughter. Then why did it bring us here? She gestured at the bobcat, which sat at the cave entrance watching them with that steady, knowing gaze. Why would it show me its loss and then lead me here if there was nothing to find? Charles's expression crumbled. Because you want there to be something, he said softly. Because we're desperate and broken and we'd follow anything that offered us hope, even if it's just a wild animal acting on instinct. The bobcat stood abruptly, its ears swiveling forward. Every muscle in its body went taut, alert. It stared into the cave opening with an intensity that made the hair on Lucia's neck stand up. Then it called. The sound that came from the animal's throat was unlike anything Lucia had heard before. Not a roar or a scream, but something guttural and complex, layered with meaning she couldn't translate but somehow understood. It was a summons, a signal, a sound that said, "I'm here, I've brought them, you're safe now." The echo died in the cave mouth. Silence rushed back in, heavy and suffocating. Charles's hand found Lucia's and squeezed so hard it hurt. The bobcat remained frozen, waiting. Seconds stretched into eternities. Lucia's heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a small death. This was it, the moment where hope either bloomed into miracle or withered into the final proof that she'd been chasing ghosts. That 3 years of vigil had been nothing but grief's delusion. That Charles was right, that Emma was gone, that this was just a wild animal and a desperate woman and a coincidence made meaningful by a mind that couldn't accept the truth. The bobcat called again, more urgent this time. And from somewhere deep in the cave, so faint Lucia thought she'd imagined it, so impossible she felt her sanity fracture, came an answering sound. High-pitched, uncertain, half human, half something else. The sound of a child who'd forgotten how to speak but remembered, somewhere in her bones, how to respond to a mother's call. Charles made a choking sound. That's not, it can't be. But Lucia was already moving. Her ruined body found strength from some reserve she didn't know existed. She crawled toward the cave entrance on hands and knees, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her vision blurring with tears and exhaustion and the terrible, beautiful weight of impossible hope. The bobcat stepped aside, making room for her at the opening. In the darkness beyond, something moved. Lucia heard the soft pad of bare feet on stone, heard breathing that wasn't her own, heard a small voice, rough from disuse, strange from 3 years of speaking only to the wind and the trees and the wild, whisper a single word. "Mama." The world stopped. Time folded in on itself. Every moment of the past 3 years, every night of waiting, every dawn of disappointment, every second of grief so deep it had become a permanent part of her, collapsed into this single impossible instant. A small figure emerged from the darkness. Filthy, wild-haired, barefoot. Her nightgown, the one she'd been wearing that last morning at the campsite, hung in tatters. Her face was lean and brown from sun and weather, her eyes reflecting the amber of the bobcat's gaze, her movements quick and cautious like something that had learned to survive in the spaces between civilization and wilderness. But it was Emma. Impossibly, miraculously, it was Emma. 3 years older, 3 years changed, 3 years transformed into something half wild and wholly alive. Her daughter. Her daughter. Her daughter. Lucia's arms opened, and the world began again. Emma didn't run to her. That was the first thing that broke Lucia's heart all over again. The way her daughter stood at the cave entrance, poised between shadow and light, her small body tense as a bowstring, ready to flee. "Baby," Lucia whispered, her arms still outstretched, her whole body trembling with the need to hold this impossible child who stood 10 feet away but might as well have been across an ocean. "Emma, it's me. It's Mama." Emma's head tilted, bird-like, assessing. Her eyes, those eyes that Lucia had seen every night in her dreams, moved from Lucia to Charles to the bobcat and back again. She was deciding something, calculating risk the way wild things do when approached by predators, when approached by humans. The realization hit Lucia like a physical blow. Her daughter was afraid of them. Emma. Charles's voice cracked on the name. He'd risen to his feet but hadn't moved closer, some instinct telling him what Lucia already understood. That you don't rush a wild animal. That you don't corner something that's learned to survive by staying untouchable. Sweetheart, we've been looking for you. We never stopped looking. Emma's gaze fixed on him, and Lucia saw her daughter's face struggle with something. Memory trying to surface through 3 years of forgetting, of becoming something else. Her lips moved, shaping words that wouldn't quite come. Her hand reached out, not toward her parents, but toward the bobcat. The animal moved to Emma's side immediately, pressing against her leg. Emma's fingers disappeared into golden fur, and only then did some of the tension leave her small frame. The message was clear. The bobcat was safety. The bobcat was home. These strangers with their tears and their desperate faces were unknown. She doesn't remember us, Charles said hollowly. But that wasn't quite right. Lucia could see it in the way Emma's eyes kept returning to her face, lingering there as if trying to match the features to some half-buried memory. Recognition flickered like a candle flame in wind. There and gone, there and gone. Emma, Lucia said softly, do you remember the song I used to sing? When you couldn't sleep. Emma's eyes widened slightly. A crack in the armor of wildness. Lucia's voice, raw and broken, began to sing. Hush, little baby, don't say a word, Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird. The lullaby felt strange in her throat after 3 years of silence. 3 years of grief that had stolen her voice. But the words came anyway, carried on some current deeper than memory. Emma's lips parted. Her hand tightened in the bobcat's fur, but she didn't look away. And then, so quietly Lucia almost missed it, she joined in. Not with words, but with a humming that matched the melody, fractured and uncertain but unmistakably there. She remembered. Tears streamed down Lucia's face. That's right, baby. You remember. I sang it every night. Every single night. She took a small step forward. Emma tensed but didn't retreat. I never stopped singing it. Even after you were gone, I sang it in your room at your window waiting for you. Window, Emma whispered, and the word sounded strange in her mouth, as if she was remembering a language she'd once spoken fluently. Her eyes found Lucia's again, and this time the recognition held. You were in my window. Every night. I saw you. The confession struck Lucia breathless. You saw me. Emma nodded slowly. She showed me. Her hand gestured toward the bobcat. She would take me close sometimes. At night. I wanted to come home, but I was scared. The loud people with lights. They scared me. Her voice was rough, unpracticed, the voice of someone who'd spent 3 years speaking only to the wind and the trees and one golden guardian. But you were quiet. You just waited. I would have waited forever, Lucia said. Emma studied her for a long moment, her wild amber-reflected eyes seeing things no 10-year-old should understand. She'd lived through impossibilities. She'd survived alone in the forest. No, not alone, Lucia corrected herself, watching the way Emma leaned against the bobcat's solid form. She'd been adopted, raised, protected by something that should have seen her as prey and had instead made her kin. I'm not the same, Emma said finally, and there was a warning in it. A truth she needed them to understand. I don't know how to be that girl anymore. The one who played with dolls and wore clean clothes and ate at tables. I don't care, Lucia said fiercely. I don't care if you never remember how to be that girl. I just need you to be alive. I just need you to be here. Emma's expression wavered. For a moment, the wildness receded, and beneath it Lucia glimpsed the 7-year-old who'd spun in circles at the campsite, who'd laughed at the dancing trees, who'd wandered toward the stream to find smooth stones and disappeared into legend. "Mama," Emma whispered again, and this time it wasn't a question. It was recognition, full and complete. It was 3 years of forgetting undone by the sheer weight of a mother's love refusing to let go. She took a step forward. Then another. The bobcat moved with her, a golden shadow, but didn't stop her. And when Emma finally crossed the distance and collapsed into Lucia's arms, small and solid and impossibly, miraculously real, Lucia felt something inside her that had been broken since that terrible morning finally begin to mend. Emma smelled of pine and earth and wildness. Her hair was matted with leaves and small twigs. Her body was lean and tough with muscle, nothing like the soft child who'd vanished 3 years ago. But her heart beat against Lucia's chest in a rhythm that sang home, home, home. Charles knelt beside them, his arms wrapping around them both, his sobs shaking through all 3 of them like an earthquake. They stayed like that as dawn grew into full morning, tangled together on a narrow ridge above an impossible ravine, while a wild bobcat sat watch over the reunion it had orchestrated. Emma pulled back finally, her face wet with tears, and looked at the bobcat. "She saved me," she said simply. "When I was lost and scared and wanted to die, she found me. She kept me alive." The bobcat's amber eyes met Lucia's across the space between them. And in that gaze, Lucia saw herself reflected. 2 mothers who'd refused to give up, who'd kept vigil over impossible hope, who'd saved each other's daughters in the only way that mattered. By refusing to stop looking. By refusing to let go. By believing in miracles even when the world said they were gone. Emma's words came in fragments, like pieces of a shattered mirror reflecting 3 years of impossible survival. She sat wrapped in Charles's jacket on the cave floor, her fingers tracing patterns in the dirt. Symbols Lucia didn't recognize, a language written in wilderness and solitude. The bobcat lay nearby, its body relaxed but its eyes alert, as if it had been waiting years to tell the story through the child it had saved. "I was so scared," Emma whispered, her voice rough and unfamiliar, shaped by disuse and the sounds of the forest. "That first night. I tried to find you, but everything looked the same. All the trees, all the rocks. I kept calling and calling, but nobody came." Her hand reached out, not to Lucia, but to the bobcat, her fingers disappearing into golden fur. "I thought you didn't want me anymore. I thought maybe I was bad, and that's why nobody answered." Lucia's chest cracked open. Charles made a sound like he'd been struck, his face crumpling with 3 years of guilt compressing into a single moment. Emma continued, her gaze distant, seeing things that existed only in memory. "I fell asleep crying by the big rocks. And when I woke up, she was there." A small smile touched her lips, the first smile Lucia had seen. "She just watched me for a long time. I was scared she was going to eat me. But she didn't. She brought me a rabbit." The casual way Emma said it, "brought me a rabbit," sent ice through Lucia's veins. Her 7-year-old daughter, accepting raw meat from a predator because it was that or starve. "I didn't know what to do with it at first," Emma said, looking at the bobcat with something like affection. "But I was so hungry. And she showed me. She ate part of it, then pushed the rest toward me. Like she was teaching me." Her voice held wonder, as if this memory was precious. "After that, she kept bringing me food. Birds, sometimes fish from the stream. She taught me which berries were safe, which plants made my stomach hurt." The bobcat shifted, and Emma's hand pressed more firmly against its side, seeking comfort or permission to continue. When she spoke again, her words emerged slowly, painfully, as if she were translating from that wordless language back into human speech. "She had babies once," Emma said quietly, "before she found me. 3 of them." Her eyes filled with tears that caught the dim light filtering into the cave. Something bad happened to them. A big animal, maybe. Or they got sick. She took me to where they were buried, under leaves and stones not far from here. She would go there and make this sound. Emma's throat produced a low, keening cry that raised every hair on Lucia's body. It was grief made audible, loss given voice. I didn't understand at first, Emma continued. But then I realized. She was like you, Mama. She lost her babies, and she was so sad. And then she found me, and I needed a mama, and she needed someone to take care of. Tears spilled down her dirty cheeks. We saved each other. Charles's hand found Lucia's in the darkness. They held each other as their daughter revealed the truth that defied every natural law they'd thought governed the world. She tried to bring me home, Emma said, and guilt washed across her small face. So many times. She would lead me toward the trails, toward places where people were. But whenever I heard voices, heard the search dogs, the helicopters, I got so scared. All those loud sounds, all those strangers. I would hide, and she would stand between me and them. Her voice broke. I thought she was protecting me from bad people. I didn't know they were looking for me. I didn't know it was you. Lucia understood then why 17 days of searching had found nothing. Why bloodhounds and thermal imaging and hundreds of volunteers had come up empty. Emma hadn't been lost. She'd been hiding. Terrified of the very people trying to save her. Protected by a creature that understood trauma in a way humans with their technology and good intentions never could. She kept trying different ways, Emma said. She'd bring me closer at different times, from different directions. But every time I heard people, I'd run back here. She looked at the Bobcat with profound gratitude. She never forced me. She just waited. She knew I had to choose. How did she know to come to our window? Lucia asked, her voice barely a whisper. Emma's expression shifted, becoming something older than her years. She started going there at night. Months ago. She'd leave me here and disappear for hours. When she came back, she smelled like home, like your soap, Mama. Your lavender soap. Fresh tears carved clean paths down her dirt-stained face. One night, maybe 2 weeks ago, she brought me all the way to the edge of our yard. Made me stay hidden in the trees. And I saw you. Lucia's breath caught. You were sitting in my window, Emma continued. Just sitting there in the dark, looking at the forest. You looked so sad, Mama. You looked exactly like she did when she visited her baby's grave. Emma's voice dropped to barely a whisper. That's when I understood. You were waiting for me. You never stopped waiting. The revelation landed like a stone in deep water. The Bobcat hadn't just saved Emma. It had been watching Lucia, recognizing its own reflection in a woman who sat vigil every night in a child's bedroom. It had understood that they were the same. Mothers who refused to abandon their posts, who kept faith with absence, who would wait until the world ended if they had to. She tapped on your window to tell you, Emma said simply. To show you I was ready. That we could stop waiting and start coming home. Lucia looked at the Bobcat, this wild creature who had accomplished what seemed impossible. Kept a child alive for 3 years, protected her, loved her, and then found a way to return her not to strangers with bright lights and loud voices, but to another grieving mother who would understand. The animal's amber eyes met hers, and in them Lucia saw not wildness, but profound recognition. 2 mothers who had lost everything. 2 mothers who had found everything. 2 mothers who had saved each other's daughters through the simple, impossible act of refusing to let go. The journey home took hours, but it felt like crossing between worlds. Emma moved differently now. Barefoot and certain on terrain that made Charles stumble, her eyes tracking movements in the underbrush that Lucia couldn't see. She held Lucia's hand on one side and kept the other stretched toward the bobcat, who padded alongside them like a silent escort through the forest it had made into a kingdom of survival. Every few minutes, Emma would stop and look back, checking. Not for danger, for permission. The bobcat would pause too, its amber eyes steady, and some wordless understanding would pass between them. Then Emma would move forward again, her small body caught between the wild thing she'd become and the child she was trying to remember how to be. "Will she come home with us?" Emma asked as they emerged from the densest part of the woods. Her voice carried a hope so fragile it made Lucia's throat ache. "She could stay in my room. I could teach her about houses and beds and—" "Baby," Charles said gently, crouching down despite his exhaustion, despite the scratches covering his arms and the tears still wet on his face. "She's wild. She belongs out here. This is her home." Emma's face crumpled, and Lucia saw the 7-year-old beneath the feral exterior, the child who'd spun in circles at the campsite, who'd collected smooth stones, who'd believed the forest was alive and dancing. "But she's the word caught in her throat, too complicated for her fractured vocabulary. "She's my mama too." The admission hung in the air between them. Lucia felt it like a blade, the knowledge that this creature had been mother to her daughter in ways she couldn't be, that Emma had learned to call two beings by that sacred name, that the bobcat had earned it through 3 years of devotion Lucia could only imagine. "I know," Lucia whispered, kneeling beside Charles. "I know she is, sweetheart. And she always will be. But part of loving someone is knowing when they need to stay where they belong." The bobcat sat on its haunches, watching the exchange with that profound intelligence that no longer surprised Lucia. She thought of all the certainties she'd held about the world, about the limits of what animals could feel or understand. They were all ashes now, blown away by the reality of this creature who'd done what seemed impossible. Loved a human child enough to keep her alive and sane, then loved her enough to let her go. They reached the edge of their property as dawn gave way to full morning. The house stood in the distance, windows catching sunlight, the porch where Emma had played with chalk 3 years ago, the life they'd tried to preserve like a museum exhibit. Emma stopped at the tree line, her hand tightening in Lucia's. The bobcat stopped too, and for a long moment no one moved. Lucia watched her daughter's face, saw the war happening there, the pull toward warm beds in her mother's arms, and the pull back toward caves and freedom and a guardian who spoke without words. She recognized that division intimately. She'd been living in it for 3 years, torn between the world that demanded she move forward and the vigil that kept her frozen in place. "You have to say goodbye," Lucia said softly, though the words cost her. Because she understood now that this goodbye wasn't just Emma's, it was hers too. Goodbye to the woman who'd stopped living, who'd become a ghost in her own home, who'd waited at windows instead of walking through doors. Emma turned to the bobcat, and the animal moved forward with ceremonial grace. It pressed its broad head against Emma's chest, and the child wrapped her arms around its neck, burying her face in golden fur. The sound she made was neither human nor animal. It was pure grief, pure gratitude, pure love spoken in a language that transcended species. "Thank you for keeping me alive," Emma whispered into the bobcat's fur. "Thank you for teaching me how to be brave. Thank you for not giving up on me." The bobcat pulled back and touched its nose to Emma's forehead, a gesture so deliberate, so tender, that Charles turned away, shoulders shaking. Then the creature moved toward Lucia. They stared at each other, two mothers who'd both been shattered and somehow remade by loss. Lucia saw her own reflection in those amber eyes, the nights of vigil, the refusal to abandon hope, the way grief could either destroy you or transform you into something fierce enough to challenge the impossible. The bobcat had watched her through that window and seen a woman drowning in absence, and had understood that saving Emma meant saving Lucia too. "Thank you," Lucia whispered, and the words felt wholly inadequate, essential. "Thank you for loving her when I couldn't reach her. Thank you for giving her back to me. Thank you for showing me that miracles still exist." The bobcat held her gaze, and in that moment Lucia understood the full scope of what had happened. This wasn't just about Emma's rescue. It was about two broken mothers finding each other across an impossible divide, recognizing their shared language of loss, and choosing to save what could be saved. The bobcat had kept Emma alive, but Emma had kept the bobcat from disappearing into grief. They'd rescued each other. And in leading Lucia to her daughter, the bobcat had rescued her too, pulled her from the bedroom where she'd been slowly dying, forced her back into the world of the living, proved that love wasn't about preserving monuments to absence but about staying alive enough to recognize miracles when they arrived clawed and golden-eyed at your window. The creature turned and walked toward the forest. Not running, not slinking, walking with purpose and dignity. At the tree line, it stopped and looked back one final time. Not at Emma. At Lucia. In that look was everything. Acknowledgement, understanding, release. A message that said you can let go now. You can stop waiting. You can start living again. Then it disappeared into the shadows, and the forest swallowed it whole. Emma's hand found Lucia's, small and calloused and impossibly alive. "Can we go inside now, Mama?" Lucia looked at her house, at the window where she'd kept vigil for 3 years, at Charles who'd loved her through her absence, at the life waiting to be rebuilt. She thought of the woman she'd been, the ghost she'd become, and the person she might learn to be now that the waiting was over. "Yes," she said, lifting Emma into her arms, feeling her daughter's heart beat against her own. "Yes, baby. Let's go home." They walked across the lawn together, a family that had been scattered and broken and impossibly reassembled. Behind them, the forest kept its secrets. And somewhere in its depths, a golden guardian curled in a den, its impossible mission complete, finally able to rest.
We appreciate you seeing the entire story. You will definitely enjoy the following story if you like this one. As you may imagine, it's more bizarre and fascinating. To view the next one, click on the image that is currently displayed on the screen.